All right, welcome to Bereans at the Gate. Today is September 29th, 2017. This is our video blog. Everybody doing okay?
Doing well.
Good to be here.
Pretty
Good.
well.
All right, lots of issues to talk about. Donald Trump is a never-ending source of interest and controversy in some ways. I was just curious why none of you decided to take a knee before our broadcast started. Is that a fair description? So the NFL, the president, they're all in a Twitter, of course, over this protesting that's taking place. I guess let's start at a pretty basic level. Do you guys think this is good politics for Trump? Let's put aside whether or not you agree with the protests. Is it smart for the president to be engaging with the most popular sports league in the country in the way that he has? Let's start there.
Yeah.
You think it's
Good
smart?
for his base. Yeah. They like it. They appreciate it. They resonate with him. He's not hurting himself at all with that. Now, of course, with the news media and with the sports establishment or administration and the players themselves, they don't like it at all, of course. But with the people he cares about, I think he's done pretty well.
You know, remember back to the campaign. Mr. Trump was always the guy that would say the things that people were thinking but were afraid to say.
Right. Yep.
Beyond the issue, that kind of gets him back to that kind of realm. And so I think for his followers, that's a pretty popular.
Yeah. Bert, what do you think?
Well, I think if he had done this during the campaign, when the protests were actually going on, that it would have resonated
Black
a little
Lives
bit more.
Matter campaign?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and also the particular gentleman, quarterback that had been doing it,
Kaepernick.
he had failed. He's failed to get a job this year. I would think probably related to this.
Yeah.
And he had already come out and said that he wasn't going to, if he did get a job, he wouldn't do this anymore. So, I don't know. I just looked again, to me, that this is more of something that Trump should not have done. And I may agree with you guys that for his followers out there, that they may like it, and I don't necessarily disagree with that part of it. But to me, he is just fanning flames that would be better left to their own.
I think that's a follow-up question.
Yeah.
So do you think that he's fanning the flames deliberately because he has an agenda at work? Do you think that he's angry and therefore tweeting about it and therefore this is all sort of accidental? Well, I mean, I guess, is this strategic on his part at some level? Is this just him being Trump? I mean, at one level I want to give him the benefit of the doubt, say there's some thought behind what he's doing, or do you think he's just venting a spleen?
I'm not sure how much thought there is. I mean, there may be some, but I think mainly it's in reaction. Now, he's seen what's going on before this began to happen even.
Yeah.
Attendance was declining at NFL games. And ESPN viewership is dropping. They're losing money, hemorrhaging money.
Yeah.
He knows the people who watch football, who go to football games, are the kinds of people that voted for him. He's aware of that in general.
You know, I tend to agree. I mean, he probably was not thinking too much that particular evening at the campaign event. Obviously, the crowd was warmed up by the things, and he just kind of got on a roll. Yep. But the reality is he doubled down the next day. So he saw this as a way to improve his standing. So.
Yeah.
No question.
There's something unseemly, though, about a president of the United States demanding that a private entity fire employees for exercising some kind of speech. So I guess at what level does this conflict with our basic view of government, with the First Amendment? At one level, you'd say, well, he's not exactly in the position to fire them. Is it bad for the country for the president to even come out and say, I think this is a fireable offense?
From an objective perspective, it just doesn't look good for the presidency or for government in general to tell someone they should be fired, for some official to tell someone, especially the president, they should be fired for what they say, which is actually just a speech act. Yes, it's not really an issue legally, of course. There's no official sanction, none of that kind of thing.
Right.
But it's just unseemly for a presidency, I think. I wouldn't have done it. I would, but I'm not Donald Trump. But I'm very thankful that I'm not Donald Trump.
Well, I think you can take it broader, of course, because we've had a number of cases, we haven't really talked about that, where the Democrats on committee hearings have voted and campaigned against certain nominees because of religious beliefs. So they're making the same case. You're unfit for that position because of your belief. This is really, in my mind, not much different. And that, unfortunately, leads me to say that right now in the political process, these extremes we're seeing, Mr. Bannon said recently that we will either have left-wing populism or right-wing populism. And for those of us that don't want any populism, we don't get to choose in that battle, unfortunately.
I think some of the outrage about this is that people are reacting to the fact that politics has entered sports.
Oh, yeah.
At some point, I think,
question.
Oh, yeah.
at some point, they can't be disconnected because obviously high-profile people say things, and movies have some political element. I mean, it's hard to get away from. But when people sit down and watch their football game, they don't really want to be thinking about Black Lives Matter or police brutality. And of course, the protesters would say that's exactly the point.
They
This
do.
is the
Yeah,
time
they
to
do.
do the
Yeah.
protest to make them
Yes.
think about it.
We gotcha.
Are we too politicized? Is that a fair assessment that we're injecting politics into everything, including sports now, to the point where it's just getting too much?
Well, I think undoubtedly, from my perspective, that's been going on now for years. I think part of the problem that ESPN is having is their strategic move to try to bring politics into their sporting broadcasts. And I know I personally, when I watch a football game, I want to not think about the real world. It's a vicarious experience of
Tennessee
sports, the
football.
world of Tennessee football. And I do not like it. I think, I still fear that largely there's not a lot of real strategy with what the president does. And like you say, he just said this during what was ostensibly a campaign rally. And then he may have been responding a little bit to it, or they kind of like that, so we'll tweet about it the next day. But it just seems to me, again, just another shiny object for him. And when he does that, it impacts our world. I mean, it's important. What he says is important whether he thinks so or not. So if he spouts off something about how football should be organized, how it should be run, I find it really problematic. I do see free speech elements here, and I think that's bad. I see little elements of totalitarianism just sort of creeping up in new ways across the globe. And so I wish that our president would be a little bit more restricted in what he says and how he says it.
But this is symptomatic.
Yeah. I would just say I'm a little bit concerned, because he didn't start this fight. He just threw the gasoline on a fire. I mean, this has been simmering.
Yeah.
And I think there's a bigger concern.
This meaning race?
The NFL protests,
Kaepernick.
extending
Yeah.
the Kaepernick, and there were, 6 people before, the weekend before, and then, of course, it exploded. Let me,
people.
please,
Okay, go back.
let me finish the thought, please. So here's the thing. We've had tremendous gains in this country over the last 50 to 75 years. And a large driver of the gains in racial relationships have been made because of the inclusion of African Americans in sports. To the extent that this minimizes people's willingness and wanting to participate in these sports, that decreases that opportunity for that to continue down that path. So I think it's harmful to the cause that they are after to do that. So I think it's a strategic mistake on the part of those that are protesting right now. And then, of course, I totally agree with you that Mr. Trump just added significant flame to the fire and shouldn't have gotten involved. But there's an issue. In fact, I would just say a pox on them all. I mean, that's kind of my feeling, to be honest.
There you did it. Okay.
On all sides of the argument?
On all sides of the argument. That we should have kept this out of the sports.
Out of the sports world.
Yeah.
Well, you look at what the gentleman did initially. I mean, to start off with, he sat down, which was indicative of, I'm checking out. You talk about football, if you're on the bench, you're out of the game. So when the anthem was played, he sits down. He did hear from some vets, and they convinced him that sitting down was not the thing to do. So he started kneeling, which is, I think certainly better. But if you remember, he also wore socks that depicted police officers as pigs. He wore Marxist tinted T-shirts.
Yeah.
And I think his perspective, again, was just way off base. He did not protest in a way that's effective. I mean, he protested in a way, as you say, into the very kind of the den of where people that would disagree with him, and basically just, I wish I could think of a polite way to say it, but he just basically told them to stick it. And he didn't work at it in a way that was going to bring people along.
Yeah.
So that's why I think the thing had really calmed down quite a bit before this, and it may calm down, it may not. may not be much carry moving into the future.
Let's broaden it a little bit, though. Right. This goes beyond just football.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
The politicizing of everything. I mean, food, what you do with your free time.
Yep.
I don't know how to list everything that's been politicized in recent years. The list is so long, and politics interferes in every corner and crevice of private life now.
Yeah.
It's where everything becomes a political issue for some group, somewhere.
Where do we go to escape that? That's really my question.
Yeah,
You could say historically church, sports for most of us, we bond over our sports teams. When those things go away, where are we?
If you just look at it kind of a conventional view of government, and we're going to have a certain level of government, and the more essentials the form of government are, you're going to have more unity in the agreement. I mean, there's not a lot of disagreement that we shouldn't have a military. We may talk about the size of it and have a lot of debate, but the larger and larger you get, necessarily you get into areas where there's more and more disagreement. So I think that plays into this as well.
I agree.
It's a good point. Just as a personal question, do you guys watch movies or listen to music or make those kinds of choices based on politics? Did you ever say, well, this actor is political, therefore I'm not going to...
If they bring it into the movie, I might. If I've heard that it's the theme of the movie, then I'm going to avoid it. But if I don't really care.
It's just the actor. I don't pay much attention.
So if Tom Cruise decides to say something about Donald Trump, that isn't going to affect your view of Tom Cruise, which is probably
Not at all.
negative to start with.
Top Gun, for example.
That doesn't bother me at all. In fact, I look at what they're doing in terms of entertainment as entertaining me. And if they want to be kind of nutty in their real life, that's okay with me.
But as you pointed out, if the movies reflect this themselves, the plot lines reflect
That's
this.
a different thing.
That's where I begin to get edgy, and I just stop interfering with
Let
it.
me circle back just briefly to the protests at the NFL, because I don't want any of our viewers to think that we don't think that there are not issues to protest. The only question is how and where it should be. So that there are some legitimate issues that have to be worked in this country, and there are ways that are going to be more effective and ways that are less effective, and I think that's something you need to think about.
So, bottom line, do you guys think it's ever appropriate for someone to protest at the moment of the national anthem? Do you think that's appropriate or not?
Yes, there could be. There could be times, I think. But I think the way they do it makes a big difference. And the attitude with which they do it, seemingly, makes a difference. The so-called body language, so to speak, as well as what they may say before or after, it makes a big difference. You can make a statement without being obnoxious about making your statement.
So are the kneelers obnoxious?
Well, the way they've been conducting it, it just rubs me the wrong way, the way it's being done right now. It's almost an in-your-face kind of thing, right? Rather than let's talk about this, let's dialogue. That's what they should be expressing in various ways.
Yeah. Jeff, as a serving military member, the only one of us, I think, to actually serve in the armed forces, does this affect? Do you see this differently because of that?
Not really, to be honest. I'm not offended by it so much as I am thinking that's unwise. I think it's, and they're bringing it in an area that I think is inappropriate. I would counsel them not to, but that's why every member of the military joined up, is to preserve their freedoms to kneel if they want to. So from that perspective, I don't have a problem, but I would encourage them not to do that. And I mean, part of this is we need to be as tolerant as we can of kind of everyone, to include social expectations. We ought to not want to offend anybody, and they know. In fact, many of them will say, we heard the Houston Rockets coach, look, we want you to be offended. I mean, this is kind of the point. You need to be very uncomfortable in this. And when you say, I want to make you uncomfortable, then you're taking a different action. So I think it's unwise.
They're going to argue that if they don't make you uncomfortable, then it's not effective protest.
True, but there are different venues.
I agree. I completely agree.
I would like to answer
last word.
I'd like to answer your question.
Yeah.
And the answer for me is just simply no. You should find a better way to protest. Don't do it at this time. Just don't do it. Now, with that said, if I had been on one of these teams, large number of African American folks on this team, and these guys were upset and wanted me to not go out during the anthem as a part of protest and solidarity with the team, I think I would have done it. Because I really see the president here starting to bring government into a free speech issue. And I think these guys, as you said, Jeff, should have the right to do this, even if I find it incredibly distasteful and do not believe anyone should ever do it.
Yeah, Trump really turned the protest into an issue of Trump. more than really what the underlying issues were.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I mean,
Problem.
that's what a politician does, unfortunately, in many
there's
issues.
truth
I
in that.
mean,
Yeah, there's
That's
truth
true.
in that. Interjected himself into the discussion.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on. Tax reform. This is a big week for tax reform. President rolled out sort of a broad outline of his reform plan. Jeff, you want to start and give us a sense of what the content of this thing looks like?
Well, I would take a step back and say it really doesn't matter so much the content. Have we ever seen any proposal from an administration in Canada that actually becomes law? I mean, what we see is many of those proposals will become something remotely like that.
Yeah.
So we don't know what the tax reform is going to be, but the general trends that Mr. Trump wants to go on, I'm hugely supportive of myself, to simplification of the tax code, eliminating some of the deductions, fewer rates. I would, of course, prefer a flat rate, but he's going to reduce rates. This is all going to be part of the negotiating process. But here's the thing for me. I think we need to keep in mind, we have a $20 trillion national debt.
Yep.
Now, growth isn't going to solve that problem. There are going to be other solutions to that. But growth helps everything. And to the extent we can have a tax system that is more supportive of growth, and I believe the framework that he outlined, changing the corporate tax rate, simplifying, eliminating deductions, will be a contributor towards that. So I'm broadly supportive of the goals, and as I would tell our audience, the specifics really don't matter that much. It's going to be a lot of negotiation for many months if it happens at all.
The devil's in the details, of course.
Sure.
And the Democrats are going to push for higher rates for the upper brackets.
Which there's some suggestion Trump isn't necessarily opposed to.
Yeah, I
Is that
know.
right? So-
That's right. There's been some talk. He may go along with that if they suggest it. Will Congress go along? We don't know.
Sure.
But he's willing to do it, I think. I don't know why exactly. Could be reasons of policy. Could be reasons just pure politics.
Yeah.
That's going to be an issue, I think. I don't know that on fairness grounds. I know that's a squishy term. But on fairness grounds, there may not be any reason to stick it to them more than other people, just because they have more money.
Sure.
Now you're getting into this issue of the ethical issue of equality.
Sure, yeah.
Right? And that's such a quagmire of philosophical and political philosophy and all this other kind of thing. And I just don't like getting into it.
Yeah, Bert, how did it strike you on the rollout?
Well, I have read over the proposal. It came forth from six individuals that were supposedly key negotiators. And one of the things in there is it says this will not be less progressive. I mean, that's one of the things. They do outline 4 items that they want to, in a sense, keep to. But I thought it was, because when I initially look at it, I think, how is this going to affect Bert? Okay, so I would look at the tax.
No self-interest there.
I think it's a very important way to look at it. And I look at this thing and I think, well, they're going to eliminate the deductibility of state taxes.
Yep.
And I think, I live in Ohio, the land of multiple taxes.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Dr. Burt likes this too much, you know? And I think about it because we're in the fortunate position where we paid our house off, so I can't deduct mortgage. I would have to make approximately $250,000 here, if it was just charitable giving, in order to actually itemize and not take the take the standard deduction. So, sure enough, the first stumbling block, even with this very broad, non-detailed announcement, is that the high tax states are in rebellion already about this.
But those are all blue
Going
states.
higher. Yeah.
I'll-
it's
I'll-
interesting.
A
Principle.
lot of them are. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
And I think that's
now,
why he's
one
doing
thing,
it.
right before we started videotaping, the Senate resolution, what do you guys call it?
The continuing resolution?
Continuing resolution,
Yeah.
I suppose. Whatever they were going to do by the 30th is out.
Yeah.
And there's room for a $1.5 trillion tax cut in that. So if I understand this correctly, it means that they would only need a simple majority to pass a tax cut of that magnitude. So that, I mean, that's over a decade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do want to comment on that aspect of it just briefly, because I find it kind of funny to hear the opposition that is now all of a sudden very, very fiscally prudent after we've added $10 trillion to debt in the last 8 years, but we're very concerned about $1.5 trillion that may lead to higher growth. So I just find that a little bit humorous.
I also don't hear anything about spending cuts. I mean,
Yeah.
this is the side of this whole
Yeah,
equation
yeah,
that
absolutely.
nobody wants to address anymore. I think they've lost the will.
But Trump
wouldn't do it.
Trump
He said he
has
wasn't.
never
Well,
been interested in it. He's
but-
never been interested in entitlement
Yeah.
reform. He's never been interested in the reduction of government. It's just.
But even if he
This
were,
is Trump.
I think Congress has lost its will.
Oh, I
Yes,
don't disagree.
completely.
But if there was leadership,
Well, there was a time.
no,
before,
was leadership.
before your day.
No, we're only a couple years
Well, we're
apart.
back
I
to
don't
Calvin
think so.
Coolidge or
Before my
something.
day.
I mean,
Oh, okay, that's what you're saying, yeah.
yeah, that's unfortunate. And you're absolutely right. The spending side is critical. We're going to have to deal with it, and no one is showing leadership on that issue. Nevertheless, if we have whenever we get a leadership, if ever we get a leadership that is willing to tackle it, if we have a stronger growing economy, it will be easier to deal with that issue at that
It
point.
will be easier to deal with, but still, from a political standpoint, it's going to be, if we are not in economic crisis, I do not think a growing economy, we won't even talk about it if the economy is growing. No one's going to simply do it. So take, for instance, mortgage interest deduction is left in there. However, the real estate agents are already pitching a fit also because without the tax element being in there as part of the deduction, it effectively eliminates the mortgage interest also.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
no, it just doesn't matter. No one, you have to have a lot of mortgage interest before you take more than standard deduction. So already, I mean, that's a case where you're getting, in essence, a payment to middle-class people to own a house. You're subsidizing their housing, and we can't even take money away from middle-income people without there being a fight.
Oh,
And,
that's
so
gonna be
it's
a fight.
really almost impossible.
Is this finally something that will unify the Republicans?
I think they have
Unified
to.
on health care, haven't unified on much so far. With Trump, with each other, is this the thing that will finally bring some closure, even in the Senate?
If they don't, I think 2018 is a really, really ugly year for them.
Could be. If they,
So I think they will. I think they will get it done.
Just out of self-interest?
They have got to get it done.
if they have any sense at all.
Any sense at all?
Any sense at all. Of
Yeah.
their own political
Yeah.
careers.
Of their own careers?
That's right.
Yeah.
But they might have made a different calculation than you have.
I'm sure they have.
But, okay.
Yeah.
But I'm
Bert,
not
what do
sure
you-
they're right in every case.
I think they need to pass something. I really do. I don't care if it's, grand at all in terms of reform. But I really think they need to do something, or I believe 2018 is going to be tough too.
Let me make one final
Sure,
comment on it.
yeah.
Whatever they do, they will pass it and they will claim it's going to make America great again.
Of course they will. And they'll all wear hats in the process.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about our next topic here. Hugh Hefner, now one of the dear departed amongst us. His life ended, what was it, Wednesday, maybe
Yeah,
Thursday, I can't remember
Wednesday.
exactly. It's created an interesting media event, I think. There's been sort of two sides have evolved very quickly, which isn't surprising, I suppose. A side certainly praising him for his role that he played in the sexual revolution.
Amazing.
Another much smaller side pushing back against that, saying that this has been very costly. First of all, let's step back and talk about this Hefner kind of as a figure. Do you think are we overvaluing Hugh Hefner in terms of his influence? Are we just making a big deal about him because he died? Or is this really
Yeah.
an important figure that we should at least note, whether we agree with him or not?
Good
Clearly,
question.
we would say no, but.
He started
Jeff?
play. Oh,
Go
he started
ahead,
Playboy
go
in
ahead.
the 50s,
Yeah,
and this was before the sexual revolution. So I think, but when the sexual revolution began in the 60s, Hugh Hefner, I think, did play a role in accelerating the
But he did
cultural
before then.
change.
I mean, it was part of what he said. I've been reading a little bit about it
Yeah.
with his passing. He thought that the mores in the United States were
Yeah.
Yes, he did.
inconsistent with gentlemen coming back from the war after World War II, and he wanted to change things. So I think in terms of him being an iconic character, then yes, we ought to look at what he did. I also think it would have happened if there was no Hugh Hefner, that everything
Yeah.
still would have rolled out.
it's
I
hard to
think it
say
would.
he caused something, but
Yeah,
he
he
certainly
caused it.
contributed to an effect, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Jeff, what do you?
I share those thoughts. While he may be irrelevant over the last 20 years, he was the seminal figure who kind of launched it. Had he not been there, somebody else would have done the same thing.
And other people have.
Let's go ahead and have the somewhat
Unfortunately.
uncomfortable conversation. So what has the sexual revolution wrought? Even if we can't blame Hugh Hefner for all of it,
Yeah.
we can certainly look at him as a marker, as a cultural marker. Let's look backwards in over 50 plus years of the sexual revolution. How has our world changed? Obviously, what kind of impact has it had? I would say it's almost overwhelmingly been destructive.
Yeah.
But I don't know, what do you guys think?
Yeah. The most important thing, and when I talk to young men these days about pornography, the most destructive thing about it is how pornography and those images, wherever they're coming from, cause the viewer to view the other party. They become someone in your imagination when you look at it that is there to serve you. And that is not the picture of way we are supposed to approach anyone.
Right.
That we are here to serve one another, and it flips that order, feeds the fleshly nature, and is very destructive to relationship, expectations, marriages. The harm is very, very large, I believe.
I agree. Extremely destructive.
Hey, let me bounce off of that a little bit, talk about what it's done with marriage. And marriage is becoming passe in the United States. And I do think that this will reap really bad benefits in the future. We're seeing them now to some extent, but the lack of consistency in child rearing will come to bear fruit. If you look at the attitudes in the U.S. in the 1960s, one survey that I've seen, 96% of the people in the United States that were part of this survey were very much in favor of a very traditional family system that would be supported by conservative Christians today, very much. Nearly 85% of individuals were against extramarital affairs. And since that time, it's just tailed off. And I fear for what's going to happen to our nation and culture over time because of this. I think that it's incalculable exactly what harm has been done through this. And it boils down to, I think the unfortunate reality is that young men can get sex outside of marriage, that the costs are much, much lower, and there's no reason to a lot of young men in this particular age to get married when they can fulfill their sexual desires outside of wedlock. Yeah. And I think Hefner played a part in that. I think probably the pill played a bigger part. Probably. But nevertheless, I do think that it's going to be sad times ahead in our nation and, of course, really across all of Western civilization.
Recent study showed that marriage has declined significantly among lower and poor classes. Now, the upper classes have declined too, but not as much. Right. They've tended to stick with marriage, education, children last, right? In that order, and they have a relatively stable life. Not that they're Christian or anything, but they're stable life. Right. But the biggest portion of people now are getting married much less frequently. Yeah. And then there's that argument by the other side that it doesn't really make any difference to culture, right? Or to the civilization in which you live. And that's something that Christians would have to disagree with. There is an ultimate cost to that, notwithstanding libertarians. Don't seem to care about that.
Well, I shouldn't take words out of the mouths of our economists, but economically, marriage has a huge positive benefit on people. And so if we continue to see this sort of disintegration, you have to think the economic effects alone are just going to be staggering.
Well, we've already seen a lot of that in terms of the child rearing. I mean, we're in demographic decline in most parts of the world. If we didn't have immigration in this country, and we could talk about that another time perhaps, we would be less than replacement ratio. Most of our viewers are probably aware of the problems in Japan. Many may not be aware China is an utter ruin, because even though they still have over 1 billion people, they have so many old people and so few young people that will be able to support them. If you were to take away the continent of Africa, every other continental area is in demographic decline right now. And those consequences are staggering. And this plays into that. That's part of it. Not exclusive, but it's a big part of it.
Sure. Bert, last word on this, or not?
I'm good.
You're good? Let me play devil's advocate for just a second. What about the people who argue the sexual revolution is important for feminists? Important for women in terms of some level of, let's say, appropriate liberation. And we could argue about what that means. Of course, here we are, 4, relatively speaking, old white guys talking about this issue. But what about the argument that the sexual revolution has ultimately been good for women? And without it, we wouldn't have seen this sort of equality develop for women in our country.
You know, it's paradoxical. It's interesting because most of the feminists I hear, while they would applaud the sexual revolution per se, they would still be against pornography. Most, not all, but that would play into it.
Yeah. I think they're mixing up the issues here. One issue with the feminist movement was, can we be treated equally in terms of jobs and so forth, things like that. And the sexual revolution didn't help them in that respect. It gave them complete anarchical freedom. And that also gave everybody else complete anarchical freedom, and that just led to the problems we see that we've just discussed, right? So in the long run, it's become radicalized too.
In the bigger picture, Mark, I'm sure you're right, but I think you do have to admit that freedom that you're talking about did allow more women to enter into the workplace that they would not have otherwise.
But at a cost in every other way. So you have to take all the costs together, not just that one, not just that benefit, but every other cost. Oh, I know.
Of course, you could look at it historically. Women had the right to vote in, 1920, is that right?
Yeah,
We see World War II and the effect on the economy, women entering the workforce there. It's hard to know whether the equality would have accelerated regardless of the sexual revolution, but certainly played a role, so
Yeah.
interesting. All right, so you guys all think that the Republicans probably will pass a tax bill of a kind. Is healthcare dead? I think it's pretty much done.
Temporarily.
This past week we saw
For this year.
For this year.
For this year, it's done.
Yeah.
Mark, you think it's done?
Eternally. In terms of moving it
Are you
back
in
into
single payer?
direction.
Are you going to go to single payer?
I'm not
I
going
think
to
it's gonna-
go there,
I think it's
but I
gonna
think it's going to
happen
happen
anyway. That's just
eventually.
me.
So if
I
you
don't
want to
think
talk
so.
about reform
Yeah.
in that direction, you can. If you want to talk about moving towards moving back towards a more market-based system, I still don't think it's going to happen because we don't want that as a group of people, as a nation. We don't want it, and it's not going to happen.
Well, okay.
All right, Jeff, you got a word?
The word is, no, sorry. That's a Moody Blues song. You wanted some culture in there, and I had to throw it in.
That's all right, that's good.
So-
Let me just say to our viewers, you guys should ask us questions, right? And you can make
Yes.
comments on our blog, so we'll post this later. You can make comments there and ask us questions. Also, you get in touch with us with Facebook, with Twitter. We're relatively easy to find on both of those things. Send us questions that way. I think I can speak for the group. We'd be happy to address a couple of questions if they come our way. So thanks for joining us, thanks for viewing, and we'll see you next time.